How you doing?
We're going nonstop here in Long Beach, but okay. And I'm getting you for Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, well, I'm a New Yorker. We moved here like 29 years ago.
Of course.
Most of my early life was in Queens.
You know how I know that, Bill,
From reading my book.
This great book right here.
Well, thank you. And let me ask you a question. Is
Sure.
wrestling fixed?
I didn't know that it was broken.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, a lot of this stuff is kind of irrelevant, but I'll explain them as you're asking the question.
Right. Okay.
What is your angle here is that this is for Cauliflower. You said you're writing a column for them, and it's based on famous wrestlers. They came from Long Island?
It's based on the fact that Long Island is, as a result of being in the shadow of New York City, it's kind of disregarded as maybe a B-town.
Oh.
But my thought on the whole thing is without Long Island, a lot of wrestling as it exists today wouldn't have happened. So in a way, it's kind of like a lost territory.
Okay.
And I figured, given the fact that you published your magazines that you edited in Rockville Center, and WrestleMania 2 was partially done here, and so many world champions have come from here.
Well, let's go into the questions and let's do it. All right?
Sure. So the first thing I want to know.
By the way, I don't want to cut you off here, but I want your viewers to know. Of course, this is Bill Apter. You usually see me clean shaven, closed shirt, and a tie. Well, we're doing this on the fly, so to say. So people might think I'm turning heel again. I did that a few months ago and did not get a good reaction. Well, I got a really good reaction. That was the scary part, but I'm not turning heel again. I just was too lazy to shave this morning.
Right. Kind of like the NWO, the heels that are so cool that you wind up loving the heels. And that's the Bill Apter mode of being a heel. So
I have two words to say to you. Hey, yo.
I'm not going to take any votes here tonight. So the first thing I want to know is people have coined the phrase the Apter mags. How do you like to have those magazines dubbed in general rather than the Apter mags?
Well, I've always been kind of a stickler. Do you know where that came from originally?
No, please tell me.
That came from Dave Meltzer, my friend Dave Meltzer. He used to call them the Apter mags in the Wrestling Observer when I was working for Stanley Weston, who published all the magazines, a New Yorker, a Long Islander, actually, with his home on Intervale Street. He's no longer with us, in Rockville Center. And but because I was out there on TV from the 70s all the way through today, people saw my face and they associated me as being the guy behind the magazines. And I wasn't. Stanley Weston was. He was the publisher. He owned the magazines. But Dave Meltzer said, you're the guy who everybody sees on TV, so they're the Apter mags. I'm flattered that people call them that, but it's not true. It's the Western mags, not Western, W-E-S-T-O-N. But I'm flattered that people look at those magazines and identify most of my career with those magazines.
Now, Rockville Center also gave the world Howard Stern, the comedian Dave Attell, June Diane Raphael, who's another comedian that people know, Amy
Jerry Seinfeld.
Jerry Seinfeld's a massive people, close nonetheless, but like
it's Long Island.
Sure. Oh, we could talk Long Island all day here.
Right.
But was there anything wrestling related within a town of Rockville Center when you were working there on a daily basis?
Absolutely not. All the action was in the offices of GC London Publishing. That's where I used to get phone calls and make phone calls to every territory. That is the place I'm looking. I thought I had my Rolodex down here, but it's actually in another part of Apter's Alley. But all the action that took place there was the good action of the magazines, and sometimes when wrestlers were upset about stories, the bad action took place. But it was also the wrestling action in Rockville Center, and the publisher never really knew this, was the Cow Championship. Behind me over here is the original cardboard belt of Cow Championship Office Wrestling. Eventually, Reggie Parks noticed the championship, and he made me a real gold belt, which I'm going to turn the camera over here, pardon my finger, that currently the statue of Bruno Sammartino that was given to me by Bud Carson of Pro Wrestling World. Bruno is right now keeping the gate. You notice he has his mask on.
Yeah.
The mask there.
Right.
So my Cow Championship, which is Cow is, here we go. Cow is Championship Office Wrestling. And I defended the title in that office against Jimmy Snuka, Jimmy Valiant, Diamond Dallas Page, New Jack. Rob Van Dam actually did a moonsault off a Xerox machine onto me. Yeah, so that action took place in Rockville Center. A lot of people, when they would talk to me about the company, they'd say, when we come to New York and we come to Rockville Center, can we see the Christmas tree? That's Rockefeller Center.
Right.
Ooh, yeah.
A little bit different there. So was the office in Rockville Center when WrestleMania 2 happened at the Coliseum?
Well, the office was first in Mr. Weston's house on Intervale Street. And then he had a building built on Maple Avenue, which housed our boxing, wrestling, and other magazines, and he rented out. So WrestleMania 2, yes, we were in Rockville Center at that point.
And did you get credentialed and all that for WrestleMania 2?
Absolutely not. Do you know the story behind that?
I know the story from reading your book about how basically...
Yeah, but I didn't go into detail.
I don't know specifically WrestleMania 2, but I know that WWF, from personal experience, has not been the most embracing of wrestling.
No, that's not what it was. That's not what it was. The issue there was that we were publishing wrestling magazines, and they came out with their own wrestling magazine. And they didn't want any other wrestling magazines down by the ring and the stands or anything. So, no, I watched that show on pay-per-view or closed circuit. I don't remember which one it was, but and it was terrible because I talked to all the wrestlers earlier that day by phone, and they were going, "Come on, F Vince McMahon, man, you just come to the building." I said, "I don't do that. It's not the way I work. If this is the rule, then that's it. Am I going to get photos? Will I send somebody in the stands to take photos? We're publishing a magazine that's a news magazine. We're not selling posters or things like that. So it's news. So we're going to send somebody." And we got a photographer there. Years later, it turned out where, although I wasn't allowed to come into the buildings and shoot pictures, I was invited back without my camera because I've been family to those people for such a long time. But the buzz where I lived in Long Island at the Cameo Townhouses in Massapequa Park, not far from this guy.
Right. That was going to be one of my future questions.
Well, we'll get to him. We'll get to him. But the buzz around where I lived in the condo in Massapequa Park, Cameo Townhouses, everybody was alive about WrestleMania 2 coming there. Yeah, but remember, it was in 3 places.
Right. Chicago, Los Angeles, and the Coliseum.
Right, and the Nassau Coliseum. Nassau Coliseum had a very rich history. When I was growing up, before the Coliseum was around, you still had to be 13 years old in New York State to go to pro wrestling. So once in a while, my father was able to get us snuck in by a New York State athletic commissioner that my father knew. And a couple of times I went to the Island Garden Arena in West Hempstead, which I think is still there at this point. So yeah, just getting back to your original question, WrestleMania 2 was there. I would have loved to have wrestlers come up early that day or the night before to let us do post pictures and stuff, but they weren't allowed to do it.
Well, the next thing I want to know about Long Island is Bret Hart's parents met in Long Beach, if I have my research correct.
Now, I have something here, if I can find it, but this place is in, can you wait one moment?
Take your time.
Take them. No, I'm not going to take my time. I'll be back in 20 minutes.
Hey, I'm here either way.
Hold on. It's funny that you brought up the Harts.
The Canadian Harts that started the lineage in Long Beach, Long Island.
Well, he was from what I understand, he was born in Saskatoon, Calgary, but he was a Long Island. He became a Long Island kid. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but I have this great collectible that he gave me on his 80th anniversary in the business. Across the street from Madison Square Garden, I met he and his wife, Helen, when Brett was wrestling at the Garden, and they gave me this and signed this to me.
Wow.
And Stu was a great storyteller. It might take you or I 3 minutes to tell a story. When I would call Stu in his office in Calgary, I'd say, Stu, it's Bill Apter. I lived on Long Island, and it would take 20 minutes just to get 2 sentences out. But he was a great character. He really was. Great character.
In all your run-ins with Brett over the years, did he ever talk about Long Island or Long Beach in general? When I interviewed Smith Hart, he talked about how he was born around here and that he came to visit over the years, but obviously he wasn't on the road 300 days a year.
No, whenever I talked to Brett or interviewed him, it was mainly about Calgary. There was always some Calgary involved there. I do a Bret Hart imitation.
Oh yeah, do you?
Sure, I do hundreds of imitations, but I don't get to do Brett now that you brought him up. I didn't know anything much about Long Island.
That's a good one. I'm used to hearing your many impressions.
Well, thank you. I haven't done that one for many people.
Well, thank you. And you mentioned Taz before. I see his jersey back there.
That hurts. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So you read in my book, Is Wrestling Fixed?
I didn't know it was broken.
Okay, you read in my book. It's 6 years old now, and it's still selling because I don't let people forget about it. I keep knocking people over the head. Get the book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But anyway, Taz is originally from Brooklyn, but most of his life was spent on Long Island, Massapequa. And I lived in the adjoining town to him, Massapequa Park. And in my book, there's an entire story about Taz and I. And when he kind of left the business for a while, he gave me that and signed it to all the people up at the office of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, just to say thank you. Yeah, he never called me Bill Apter. You know what he called me?
Bill
Apter. Yeah, Bill Apter, you know? This guy, Bill Apter.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, but he's a very proud Long Island kid.
I've heard of him being from Woodhaven. He also does the Red Hook thing. Your book talked about
well, Red Hook is Brooklyn.
Right.
Woodhaven's Queens.
Wherever he's from, did he train on Long Island?
I think he trained in Brooklyn.
Got it. At Gleason's Gym or something like that?
Well, Gleason's was one place, but I think he trained at a few different places. I think he trained in Queens. I also think he may have trained in, I'm going to bring up a name that you may not be familiar with, who is from Long Island, and I don't know if Taz trained there at all. Were you familiar with a Long Islander? And he's no longer around. His name was Mark Tendler.
I don't, but please tell me more. Okay,
Mark Tendler was one of my dearest friends. Beside being what they considered a jobber way back in the 70s, Mark wrestled regularly at almost every card at the Nassau Coliseum, Island Garden. He was married to Kitty Adams, another lady wrestler, of course. Mark had his own federation out in way out in somewhere near Holbrook or whatever. That was his second career, so to say. His first career, he was a bodyguard. He worked at the Riverboat Hotel at the Empire State Building, and he was a bodyguard. And he got me to meet Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis. He was Frank Sinatra's bodyguard for many years as well. Real tough guy. And eventually he owned a topless bar in, I think, West Babylon. And something went awry that night, and he was killed mafia style on Long Island. And I remember driving from Massapequa to the office in Rockville Center on Sunrise Highway. And when I heard that on the radio, I had to pull over to the side, and I was sweating and shaking because I was supposed to be with him that night. He invited me to his club, and I told him I couldn't go. But Mark was the one of the first people to recognize and bring in a guy named Mick Foley. Mick Foley worked for him at all these spot shows on Long Island forever before he became a big star. Mark was one of Mick Foley's closest friends. Yeah.
So the history of Long Island wrestling, what I alluded to before about all the world champions that have roots here, whether they grew up here or whatever. So, of course, we talked about Taz, and you just mentioned Mick Foley. Bret Hart, it's debatable because maybe he didn't grow up here. He is more Canadian than not.
Yes,
Chris Jericho was born here, and, you know, who's had a longer career and more world championships than him at this point? And
Le Champion.
Le Champion, indeed.
Yes.
The list just goes on and on and on.
Wait a minute. There's one guy that I forgot all about until I was coming down the steps from the living room to Apter's Alley. And do you know who Paul Bosch was?
Yes, he gave Bruce Pritchard his start from Houston Wrestling.
Well, Paul Bosch was the legendary promoter of Houston Wrestling, one of the most famous, most well-known, most genuine human being promoters I had ever met in my entire life. And he was originally from Brooklyn, but immigrated to Long Island very quickly. And before he went to Houston to become such a super success, he was a Long Island kid. And then, of course, we need to talk about Matt Cardona.
Of course.
To be known as Zack Ryder.
Of course. He used to live in the building next door to here. He's originally from Merrick. Kurt Hawkins, his tag team partner, also has some Long Island time as well. It's really such a long list. I mean, for you specifically, Andy Kaufman from Great Neck.
Thank you for saying Kaufman, because here in Pennsylvania, everyone says, "You knew Andy Kaufman?" I said, "No, I knew Andy Kaufman." Yeah.
You said it correctly. And I'm going to give you the biggest credit or compliment that I could ever give, because if the legend is correct, you introduced him to Jerry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Jerry. If you go to YouTube and put in Bill Apter interviews Jerry Lawler, he mentions it on every interview. It's in my book, of course. But yeah, I'm the guy who put the key in the ignition and introduced the two of them. And as the old cliche says, the rest is history.
Of course. Yeah. And Jerry did the foreword to your great, great book, which I'm sure we will say the name of many more times to come. But what I'm getting at with this whole thing is that is, as far as I can trace, the first celebrity angle in the history of professional wrestling.
Yeah, this was, to me, and Jerry Lawler told me one time he was sitting on a plane with Vince McMahon, and Vince said to him that's the only angle that didn't happen that he would have loved to have happened. But years before that, his father didn't want any part of that. But I think that I was instrumental in the beginning of what became sports entertainment. And Andy was at several of the Garden shows where Vince interviewed him at ringside, but they never did anything.
Right. So if that is the first celebrity interaction in a professional wrestling storyline.
Well, in a major national, worldwide way, I'm sure there were territories that had celebrities involved, but nothing to this extent.
Right, but that predated WrestleMania 1 having Liberace and Muhammad Ali.
You're right.
Exactly. You see it there in that great, great book. So what I'm...
There's a photo of Andy and I at the Garden after Lawler pile drove him in Memphis. That's the photo, yeah.
So if that led to all the future celebrity angles, so you could take credit for Gronkowski coming into WWE, I guess.
No. He's too busy for me.
Exactly.
No. I don't take credit for any other celebrity thing. There were other celebrities who were wrestling fans that I tried to get in to sing the national anthem. Aaron Tippin, the country singer. Darius Rucker, who's a dear friend of mine. I've recommended a lot of people. but nothing ever saw the light. But Andy Kaufman was a gem.
Right. And as a comedy fan and a wrestling fan, somebody who's intrigued by Long Island stuff and Judaic kind of stuff, that kind of checks all the boxes, all the stuff with Andy Kaufman. And being from Long Island, as I said, and yourself having all the Long Island involvement and all that, do you know if he went to house shows or any live events on Long Island growing up? What his introduction?
Yes, he did. He did. Yes. Yeah, he was a wrestling fan.
I know that there were shows at the Comac Arena on Long Island.
Oh, right. I forgot all about Comac. Yes, another arena I wasn't allowed into because I was too young.
I know that Long Beach High School had some weirdo kind of shows where Mr. Fuji was in the main event in maybe the early 80s.
Yeah, a lot of the high schools around Long Island ran WWF shows. Yeah, yeah. And actually, Mark Tendler was, who I mentioned before, was on any show they did. And Vince Sr. and Jr. loved Mark because if they needed a favor, if they needed someone picked up at an airport or something, they'd bring Mark. Mark was kind of a professional gopher in a lot of ways, but he was, they let him wrestle all the time. He was a very close friend with Bruno Sammartino. He was one of Bruno's very closest friends.
Were you still on the island when ECW was running shows at the Freeport Rec Center?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, wait a minute. No, I'm thinking of here, because when we moved here, they were running about 2 miles from the offices in Fort Washington here. I don't remember.
2 miles from the Port Washington, there were ECW shows.
ECW shows at the Lulu Temple in it's called Broad Axe or Bluebell. Yeah, they ran at the Lulu Temple, and eventually and I went to a bunch of their shows there when we moved here from Pennsylvania, but they were eventually not allowed to come back when a couple of their guys stained the walls of the Lulu Temple with blood. So, yeah.
Well, another compliment that I'm going to throw your way is I can't think of anybody else in the wrestling business who is on the good side of like Taz and Paul Heyman and the old timers. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is,
and the new guys
that bridged the gap and all that. And I'm wondering how much of that was by design, because when you were, full time, you were still doing things in character, whereas Dave Meltzer's more reporting things down the line as news.
Yeah, we were an entertainment type of magazine, if you really think about it. My thing, I get emails and texts and Facebook IMs from hopeful journalists that want to do what I have done and continue to do. And the business has changed. You can't do what I did. But they said, well, how come I can't get this or can't get into this show? I wrote a column about this. And I said, my philosophy has always been, my mother brought me up, it's nice to be nice, okay? I knew when to listen and when to talk. But the main thing is, and I rarely ever use curse words, the whole key to this is don't piss anyone off. That's it. It's that easy. And also, I think I was the first guy to go back in the dressing rooms who wore a sport jacket and a nice dress shirt and a tie, and I looked the part. I was Jimmy Olsen.
Right.
I looked like a reporter, and the guys initially sought me out knowing that if they befriended me, I could probably get them in the magazines. But after a while, that befriending became actually friendship with so many of these guys. But getting back to your original question, is that Dave Meltzer is a hard news reporter. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's not what our magazines were about. Our magazines were more like sensationalism, something to grab the fan, to go with the angles that they were doing in the business. And if there wasn't a good angle, and we got a good set of pictures from a photographer. What are we going to do with this? I got an idea. Let's say that this guy and we create a little, and sometimes these guys use that to their advantage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a relationship-driven field, and
oh yeah, my goodness. It's funny because when WWE took our press privileges away, other companies jumped on. Jim Crockett called me, "You want to be on TV? I'll put you on TV every week. You can put our guys in the magazine. We'll help you." It's great. I was on TBS for 2-3 years. It's wonderful. Vern Gagne, the same thing. Greg would call me up. "Would you like to come and be on our TV?" Because everything was meshing with the magazine and the TVs there, except for Vince McMahon. They all appreciated the publicity, and in exchange, if we wanted to present our awards, etc., on there, it showed that their promotion was even more prestigious. Because here's a guy coming from New York City, baby, and presenting awards from a national, international magazine company.
Well, do you have time for 3 more quick topics?
I am with you. Hold on, I just have to click something on my computer here. No, please.
Okay. You are obviously not exclusive to any one wrestling company, nor have you ever been, because you've always spoken with all the top talent, past and present. I was intrigued to see you be critical of a WWE storyline a couple nights ago on social media. In fact, it was last night, and I totally agree with you on that one.
Retribution, yeah. I'm very bothered. I'm very bothered by that. It's very rare, and I was going to do to see all the videos, go to www.onewrestlingvideo.com. And that's where all my interviews and my editorials are. And I was thinking today about doing one of my editorials on that, because I don't knock anything, but Retribution, I mean, I understand it was almost like like the children of the Black Scorpion from WCW, coming in with the bats and the whole thing. I don't know how good that is in these days when there's so much unrest in the world. But okay, I'll put up with that part. But when they went out and they took that girl and she was lying face down and they pulled her, like backwards, it was almost like I didn't know what they were going to do to her.
Right.
Let your mind wander. I didn't know what would a gang do with her in that
right
place where she was. So yeah, that really bothered me, and I didn't like it.
It kind of reads to me like a horrible redo of the Nexus with the worst of the Dark Order combined into one story.
Yeah, but I would be okay with it, but that one thing with the girl really went too far as I'm concerned.
Well, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I would assume that you like AEW because it uses a lot of legends, and while the psychology might be a bit new or new age to you, at the same time it is combining the old and new in a good way. Do I have that correct?
Absolutely, but let's not take this out of context. I still like WWE too. I watch everything. Okay, Ring of Honor, AEW. AEW is amazing. I think the A, instead of all, should be Amazing Elite Wrestling. And the reason being that for the short period of time that company has been around, they have accomplished amazing things. Yeah, and I like their very bright lighting. Technically, I think their show looks great. I like the excitement of almost that old WCW feel of who's going to show up next.
Yeah.
I hate spoilers. I don't look at them. I'm still a fan. I want to be surprised. So yeah, I like their product very, very, very much.
And a name that came up before we were recording, Maxwell Jacob Friedman. Do you see him as maybe the future of the business?
He's a new generation star. He cuts fabulous promos. The thing he did last week with his State of the Union address or his press, I thought that was great. I really did. I think he will be one of the people to carry the business into the future. Yeah, definitely. But it also depends. It also depends what AEW does with him, because you can have a megastar like WWE has had opportunities with Ricochet and Ali, and man, these guys are great. And all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, and your winner is Ed Ferrer. You know, it's like, well, it depends how AEW handles and keeps MJF alive.
I just noticed 2 quick topics I did not ask you about.
That's fine. I need to pause for a minute because my battery is. Paul Bosch, he gave me this. This is the oldest wrestling magazine I have. It's from 1947.
Wow.
I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. Wow. Apter's Alley is the real deal.
Look at this. Paul Bosch gave me this on one of my trips to, and you can, here, you can see the inscription here.
Yeah.
Sure.
Stanley Weston.
Take a photo of that. You can do that.
Sure. So before I mentioned Kurt Hawkins, Brian Myers, and he and Pat Buck have a wrestling school here on Long Island called Create a Pro. And that's where Maxwell Jacob Friedman, Chris Statlander, Max Caster, a lot of great prospects have been coming out of. Were you aware in decades past of wrestling schools on Long Island otherwise? And it's
just Mark Tendler's.
Oh, really?
Just that one. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone who trained out of that you recall?
Well, Mick Foley was he was there regularly, and Mark Tendler, as I mentioned. Trying to think of any of the Sunny Beach.
Yeah, from UWF. Yeah.
Yes, Sunny Beach. Possibly Stevie Richards. No, Stevie Richards wasn't back there. There was someone who looked like him, and I'm trying to place him, and I can't. No, but that's about as much as I remember from that.
Okay, and then the last topic that I missed, let's see, that
Bubba Ray Dudley, wasn't the ECW school there for a while?
I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that he was from Huntington or grew up part of his life in Huntington.
Yeah, but there was a school on Long Island, and I remember taking my son Brandon when he was probably 8 or 9 years old for me to go take pictures of Bubba at the school. He and Taz were running the school, and Tommy Dreamer may have had an involvement in it. I'm not really sure I remember, but my son at 8 or 9 years old was fairly beaten up by Bubba Ray, and then my son pinned him. So, and if you ever talk to him, he'll remember that. But no, their school was on Long Island for sure. Absolutely for sure.
Okay, I'm going to have to do some research on that.
Taz, Bubba Ray, and like I said, maybe Tommy Dreamer.
Okay, and then the last Long Island question I have for you is, I remember when I was growing up that John Arezzi and Vince Russo both had their radio shows on Long Island. Mm-hmm. Were those going on when you were working at a Rockville Center?
I'm sure they were, but I wasn't very tuned into them at that time.
Were there other radio shows on Long Island that you could recall, or people in the Long Island wrestling scene?
No, I was interviewed by a couple of stations back then, but no, there was no other one as far as I know. And all of them were in New York, and I was one of them back in the early 70s.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, you have definitely covered my whole list and helped preserve a lot of history that unfortunately isn't documented in the same place.
Well, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to be help. And send me the link. You have my email address. Send me the link to wherever you run this, and I'll make sure that I disperse it all over my social media.
Absolutely. If there's anything I can ever help with, you know where to get me as well. And anything missing from Long Island,
you know what I might do? I might call on you sometimes to do a split screen Apter's Alley.
Paltrocast.